Yes, indeed, Lizo. It's a Friday, right? So much has happened in South Africa this week, and I honestly feel like this week has been an entire month.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up. We're going to look at the headlines, the newspaper headlines in the paper trail. We're joined by political analyst, good friend of the shows, Kanya Wunani. Kanya, good morning.
Morning. Happy
nice
Friday.
to see you smiling. Happy Friday. Well,
I don't know about
happy in the sense of, we're alive.
Trying to keep upbeat in the midst of chaos.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
So when we look at the papers, for the most part, the president is on the cover, save for the Star. They're leading with testimony at the Zondo Commission about what happened at the SABC. But for all intents and purposes, the issue of gender-based violence and the state's response being on the cover. Business Day leading with president saying, together we can end violence. Citizen saying, Cyril talks tough. The Mail and Guardian doing quite an extensive, in-depth assessment of, the war on women, the issues to this point, the state's failure to respond. They even look at a family who had a murderer, someone who killed their daughter. They were given a life sentence. And of course, this matters because the president has now said life should be the minimum sentencing. And they speak about how, even with the life sentencing, the system has failed them. President Cyril Ramaphosa on essentially every newspaper this morning. Your thoughts on the speech that was yesterday evening?
Last night's speech, it was a culmination of some tough talk, but very little action. I think that we're at a stage in the week's newsfeed whereby the president really should have used the opportunity to address the country with action. Not just plans of what is maybe in place and what will happen in the next 2 years, but here's where we are and this is where we're going. Yes, I commend the president for not taking seriously things like the state of emergency and the death penalty, because both options, I think, veer us into dangerous territories in terms of binary when it comes to the issue of punishment, right? And our legal system, I think, needs to do more unpacking of its own processes, especially when it comes to sexual offenses. The act itself really needs to be amended. Things like having a sexual offenders list not being made public and not being made available to employers has created a scenario where we can't call people out for their offenses, and we can't restrict their movement or their access to women and children. I mean, Uyinen is a case in point with regards to that. The government has not just failed in making more stringent, I think, changes, but it's failed to recognize where the lapses have been. Because this is not only a Cyril Ramaphosa administration problem. This is a problem that's covered at least 4 administrations with regards to gender-based violence.
So now let me ask this, right? And in fairness to the president, when we criticize him and we criticize his response to things, do you think we're being fair to him? Because you've got to consider he's only 1/3, right, he's only one sphere of government, right? So just as an executive, there's really little he can do when it comes to the judiciary, legislature. He can have the best ideas in the world and the best intentions. Will it pass parliament, right? For example, will it be tested in courts and go through? Those are things that I think he's got to consider. And some of the reasons why people get the bail that they get, why people get the parole that they get, some of the reasons why, for example, sexual offenders list is not published is because they too, even though they are offenders, have rights that are enshrined in the Constitution, right? And so I can't now go and impinge on your rights where the Constitution says I shouldn't.
No, I completely understand. There's a balance. You have to balance the scale between rights and responsibility. But I think you're right in some instances when it comes to the other spheres of government playing ball and being able to show its teeth and show its muscle when it comes to not just saying that a specific law needs to be amended, but going forward and following through. I mean, there was a women's parliamentary session that happened at the end of August. We don't even know what the outcomes were from that session and what was going to be taken forward by the Justice and Constitutional Development Committee that sits in Parliament. So the calls to make changes in the legislative sphere and the judicial sphere basically hang in the balance between the two of them, not just in sort of what is the rate at which we can pass a law, but how do we create catalysts within those particular mechanisms to ensure that we have a rapid rate to response. Not just to say things for the sake of reacting to them, but to actually act in the interest of people. And a lot of people have been saying that, you know, maybe from an electoral point of view, we need to think about whether constituency should not rule in the case of the parliamentary system that we have right now, so that there is more rapid response, so that there is more tabling of these sorts of issues moving forward, and that there are the way in which people vote within, for example, a parliament. I think I've spent a lot of time on parliament itself, changes so that we can see not just recommendations or a memo being put forward from a protest from the Am I Next or total shutdown movements, that it becomes something tangible.
And the other thing, of course, the president was speaking about the finance minister having to find money. And of course, we know that the fiscus is, I mean, it's truly in distress. And I think that's quite an apt description. And one of the reasons, and part of the consequences of how we've run the fiscus is the Justice Department, as an example, as a whole, is underfunded. So when the president speaks about us reviewing gender-based violence cases that were closed or were not investigated properly, of course, that would fall within the ambit of the NPA, but we also know that the NPA has no money. In fact, so much so that the Justice Minister is talking about receiving private funding and saying we will ring fence it around training. So, you know, even when we speak about the plan, there is the question around how are we going to fund this? When the president says we're going to use all available policing resources, we know SAPS, for instance, is under-resourced. In fact, we had an issue with the supply or how many rape kits we had, evidence kits we had in policing. So there's also the question of, so where is the money for it? How will we fund this project?
Because the devil's always in the detail.
Yeah.
I can come out and tell you what you want to hear, but can I then do what you need done?
Exactly. I mean, it's going to be a difficult sort of straddle between the different departments involved, because I think one of the things we need to remember is when it comes to things like rape kits and that, one of the ways in which he could find other funding is to look into health, because health has the biggest budget in the country. And rape kits, as much as, yes, they fall under the ambit of SAPS, a lot of the care that has to take place between reporting a case and then going to hospitals, I mean, there's a connection there, there's a link there. There has to be discussions had between health and SAPS. We're like, okay, if we don't have the money right now to make sure that every single police station in the country can have regular distribution of rape kits, then where's your nearest clinic? How does the nearest clinic, how does the nearest hospital help in redistributing some of their funds into making sure that rape kits are available? The fact that Bekele could say at the National Assembly that, guys, more than 60% of our stations don't have rape kits, that is a massive problem. That's something we can't avoid or unsee or try and hide away from. I think what Treasury needs to do is to look at where the links are. Another example is social development. In their spend, is there space to redistribute funds into the Tutuzela centers? Because a lot of the plan has been sort of put money into the legal services, which is fantastic, but it doesn't deal with the psychosocial issues that happen on the ground. Because once lawyers are gone and the case is over and this person is convicted, what happens to the person who is affected? What happens to the families that are affected? What happens to these shelters who are now having to contribute to the safety of these families that have been affected by gender-based violence in one way or another? I think that the ministry needs to reconsider in such strenuous times ways and means to diligently and I think effectively look at their spending, not just sort of public spending and trying to cut that, but also look at places where if the money is not being used in a particular department, pull it and use it for something that is urgent and that is pertinent to societal need.
Kanya, please hold it there because we want your thoughts as well at home. Tweet us at 45 Mornings. Get involved in the conversation. When we come back, we're having a discussion in Today in Politics about what we saw yesterday from President Cyril Ramaphosa versus what we saw yesterday from Julius Malema. What were your thoughts? We'll tell you exactly what we thought when we come back.